Well, hello there, and welcome to another update on Jake's Farm. In the last episode, I was suggesting that I was working with menus that I will put up on the screen so that rather than having to press one of three buttons to plant a vegetable, I can just press one button that brings up a menu from which I then select what vegetable I'd like to plant, and then I pick it, I close the menu, and I go and plant that vegetable again. And I have implemented that, and I thought I'll let you know while it's fresh in my mind how I actually did that. So let's have a look at the current state of affairs. I'll go and play my project here, make it full screen, and just like last time, I can wander around and I can plant things with one button now, but also I can go and bring up this selection menu from which I can now pick whatever I want to put in here. So this is a scrolling menu, and I haven't hooked up all the buttons. These are just icons I had lying around, except for the first three here. Those are actually taken from game assets, and I've just made those in Blender. I'll show you how I did that too. So I can pick a potato, a tomato, or a pepper here. I can also select any of the others, but they don't really do anything, so they're not really hooked up. So if I go and pick a tomato, I'll go and have to close the menu, so I can't walk around while the menu is showing. I'll go close it again, walk to wherever I want to walk to, and then go and plant a tomato, or two, or three, or four. As many as I like, in fact. So I can go and bring that up again, plant maybe a few potatoes as well. Over here, there we go. And perhaps, a couple of peppers. Just like it was working before. There, peppers, awesome. All the other functionality is still in there, so I can go ahead and try to harvest them. These are not ripe yet, so I can't harvest those. And this one, I suppose, has now grown already, so I can harvest that. And the other ones, well, they just need a bit of time for, to grow up there. But I've explained that functionality in my last video. There was a lot to it in the last video, including the counter. I've also explained the counter in the previous video. So today it's all about that menu. And one slight specialty about this menu is I have to press the left Alt key to bring it up and press the left Alt key to take it down again. But I can also use my Gamepad to navigate in the menu, and that actually presented quite a bit of an issue there. So on my Gamepad, with which I can also walk around, I have to press the not the menu button, but the other one on the Xbox 360 controller. It's the select button, and then I can go and navigate in the menu. So that's kind of a special thing there, and thank you so much to Dean Ashcroft, who was explaining how this works. I will put a link to his video in the description. So I'll pick a potato, and then I can go and plant potatoes here, or select the pepper. So I have to hover over that and then actually press the A button. This is all built-in functionality that I didn't have to implement. And then I just go and plant my peppers or plant my tomatoes. And then for a real game, I would probably add a little text field on top of this that would tell me how many of these seeds I have left, and if I don't have any left, then I can't plant these things. And yes, I can't really harvest them if they are not harvestable. There we go. That is how that works. Let me show you how I've done that. I'll go and get out of here again and make that small again. Oh yeah, actually one other thing before I forget. I was looking into two types of menus, by the way. So this was the scroll menu, I'd like to call that, but there's also one that I'd like to call the circular menu, or the radial menu. That's how this works. And I decided not to use this for this project. I have hooked it up, and you can see that the selection is actually working, both with the gamepad and with the mouse. The moment you press a key, you hold it pressed, and then you quick select something, kind of loused up the way this looks here, but that is possible to implement that as well. I just thought for picking what seed you want to plant, I don't think that's the right kind of menu. This is more like a quick selection one, in which you want to quickly select some kind of mode and then go back to the game. I didn't think this was going to be suitable for picking the kind of seed you want to plant here, because there's so many plants we're going to potentially plant that we're going to run out of spots here, I would imagine. Anyway, just thought I'd let you know that what I'm explaining now is the scroll menu, or the scrolling menu, rather than the radial menu, which is something, we'll leave that for another day. So there's several pieces to the puzzle. The first one is, of course, the UI itself when the menu comes up. And for that, I've created a new widget blueprint down here, UI selection. I've done that by heading over to user interface widget blueprint. And this is what it actually looks like. So that's the first part. How does the menu work? What items did I put in that menu? Then how did I bring it up on the screen, and how do I make it go away again? And then how do I navigate in that? And then once I've made a selection, how do I then react to the selection? So those are the parts to the puzzle. This is the first one, and this is in fact the regular canvas panel here. In it, we have one scroll box. That's this here, that's the one with the green outline. And inside the scroll box is something called a wrap box. Those are handy UI elements to have. So I'm using them in conjunction here. The first thing is in fact the container that makes whatever's on the inside scroll up or down or left and right. And I can go and expand that to show you the whole thing that's inside the menu. And in fact, if I expand it like that and now run my game, it will still work the moment I bring it up. But it would, in fact, just show the whole thing. It wouldn't scroll because there's nothing to scroll there. But the moment I make that smaller, the buttons kind of go to the bottom of it, and whatever's on the inside will be scrollable. Now, the magic that is happening here with the buttons are inside what's known as a wrap box. And the wrap box is shown in its full size when you select it. And it is a thing that just holds a number of items. Could be text items, could be buttons, could be images. And the wrap box does something quite special. And the moment I expand the scroll box horizontally, look what happens to the buttons. They kind of just go and snap and reorder themselves, and that's all thanks to the wrap box. So the wrap box makes sure that whatever I put in there isn't kind of expanding itself to the full width of the container above it, in our case the scroll box. It assures that if there's too much on one line, it just wraps it and breaks it up into the next line. That's what that's what the wrap box does. So it's a nice nifty little feature. I was kind of looking for a way to make sure buttons are presented in this way, and I think first I used a horizontal box and several horizontal boxes underneath one another that I put inside the scroll box. But the problem with navigation was then if I used my gamepad to do that, I could only ever navigate left and right, and if I'm on, like, say, this menu item and I go down, I would not go to this item but to that item. So wherever I'm on the right hand side, I would always go and navigate to the first item of the next row down, and I didn't really want that. So then I found the wrap box, and that is in fact how that works. Inside the wrap box are lots and lots of buttons, like literally, it's not exactly thousands, but there's a lot. And most of them are just dummy buttons because I only hooked up the first 3, but I had to have that many to see if the thing actually would scroll. So much like we had in the Flame in the Flood, they have a similar kind of menu that that works. On each button, only the first 3 are labeled properly, like button potato, button tomato, and button pepper. On each button, we can have one child object that can either be an image or it can be a text object. And I've chosen an image, which is then that little icon here. So the buttons are kind of interesting because they can also have, they don't have to have an image as a child object. They can become an image themselves. Let me see if I can show you this. If I select the button object, I can set an image onto that if I wanted to. So the button object is in fact this gray container, and on top of that we see an image. But that also means that the gray container underneath it, or the gray kind of box, can be pressable, and we can see this kind of going down. It has a little shadow outline and all that. So that is all done with the custom built-in way that the default buttons work. But I can set my own button image for the normal state, or in fact, check it out, for the hovered state, or for the pressed state, or for the disabled state. So I could literally come up with 4 images that I can use, and I can create my own custom button that looks very different than just having the gray background. I chose the easy way and just dragged an image onto the button. And that is that. Each button is the thing that actually interacts. So on the button, further down on the right, I can now hook up an on-clicked event, and that is in fact what I've done there for the first 3 buttons. So that's how I can select them. I have to hook that up for every single button so that every single button can react. If I had more things in my menu, then that's how I would hook them up. We'll have a look at that in a moment in the graph editor. This is how I react to the button presses. But there's a lot going on under the hood in both in the UI as well as for the tutorial player controller. So I'll explain that in a moment. Let's go to the player controller a moment and have a look how this thing actually ends up on the screen and how we can navigate through it. So yes, there's a lot of code in my player controller already. This is actually from Katie's new tutorial about the ray casting, or the line, what's it called in Unreal Engine? Not ray casting, it's called line something, not line drawing, something line something. That I haven't come to terms with that yet, but I'm working on that, because I think that is the key to planting a plant where my actual crosshair image is. I think we can do that with that. Creating a plant, harvesting, radio menu, add the selection menu to the viewport. So I've called this one the scroll menu or the selection menu. So there's 3 parts to this here: adding it to the viewport and then making it visible and invisible when we don't want it. So those are all these parts here. So first of all, I will show you how to create it. So add selection menu, that's a custom function that just hooks into event begin play. That's calls this. So we're going to create the thing I've just explained, the UI selection widget, with a reference to self. We are the tutorial player controller in this case, so a reference to self is fine. If you ever need that, by the way, you can just go and drag off this, and you can either type self or you can type this if you're familiar with that. I think this should work. Doesn't work. Excellent. Glad I'm explaining that. So self is what we want. Create UI widget with a reference to self. Don't forget to select what you want. I'm promoting this to a variable, so I can reference this later in the next step to just reference it and go and make it visible or invisible. I'm adding it to the viewport after promoting it to a variable, and I'm setting its visibility by default to hidden. So therefore it's always there, but we don't always see it. That happens in the next step when I'm reacting to a custom input action, which is in fact either the left keyboard press or the special key on the gamepad. That summons this thing, and in that we're first of all asking the key that summoned this thing, is it a gamepad key? And if that is the case, then I'm setting a Boolean variable here on the player controller that says we are using a gamepad. I need that for navigational purposes. I'll talk you through it. That's just to set this variable. If no matter which button has pressed this, the keyboard or the gamepad, we're saying is my selection menu visible? That's another Boolean variable we're coming to in a moment. If it's visible, then hide it. If it's not visible, then show it. And those are 2 other custom functions that I'm calling here. So that happens here. It goes and says, hey, button is pressed. Are we a gamepad? Yes or no? If we are, set this variable. If not, then the variable is cleared. Then we're asking, are we already visible? In which case, make us invisible. If we are not visible, then go ahead and make us visible with these 2 custom functions here. That's the next step. These look kind of involved. Let me talk you through how we show the menu. And this one is then the reverse process when we're hiding the menu. So we're showing it by grabbing a reference to our selection menu here. I'm also grabbing a reference to a button, any old button, on the inside of that menu, which is in my case the potato button, potato. That's the one that I need to grab from the menu. That's one of the buttons that exists. I need this to make this work with the gamepad. If you don't have a gamepad, or if you don't care about that, you don't have to do this. But in my case, I have to do this. Otherwise, so one button must be in focus, one button must have keyboard focus, and then magically gamepad navigation is just going to work. And if we don't have a button that has keyboard focus, then it's not going to get it unless I select it. So I need to have one and just set focus on that manually. Any old button will do. I'm using the potato button. That's why I'm setting keyboard focus here. Then we're going ahead and setting the visibility of our widget to visible. It was invisible beforehand. It already exists. It was just invisible. So we're making it visible. Then we're setting a custom Boolean variable here that just says, is my thing on screen right now? And if it is, then you know that button is set. So I could have probably queried this variable, the visibility of the keyboard. That was difficult. I tried it. There were some issues with that. So I thought, no, I'm going to have my own custom Boolean variable that lets me know, is this thing on the screen or not? So in this case, we're setting it so it is on the screen. Then we wait. I have to do this because otherwise, if I set the visibility and set the game mode literally in such short succession, something isn't going to work. And Dean Ashford can explain this much better than I do. I've linked to his video in the description of mine. In it, he explains to you why you need to do all these. But we have to do this. We have to wait 0.1, 0.2 seconds. And then we can switch the game mode into game and UI so that the player can use the UI. Not UI only, because once again, if you have a gamepad and you set it to UI only, the gamepad controls will stop working. So you have to use game and UI with a reference to ourselves, the player controller. But because we're enabling game mode as well as UI mode, I have to now make sure the player can't move or look around anymore. So I'm setting those two values to false, essentially. I'm ignoring look input and I'm ignoring view input. Look input and move input. That is what's necessary to bring this menu to the screen. So once again, just to recap here. Show selection gets a reference to our menu, also puts keyboard focus onto a button, not to the menu itself, but to a button inside the menu. Then sets the menu to visible, sets our Boolean variable to let me know that it is on the screen. We're waiting a moment. Then we're setting the game mode to game and UI. We're ignoring look and move input when the menu comes up. On the other end, if we press that button again, the toggle button, it'll default, thanks to our summoning function here, it'll go and hide the menu again, and that happens here. So it's essentially the reverse of it. We're grabbing a reference to a menu, we're setting its visibility to hidden, we're clearing our own custom variable here, and we're resetting the game mode to game only. So we're disabling UI components. We're enabling the look input and the move input again. And we're also clearing our variable that says, am I using a gamepad? That's less important in the player controller. It's more important in the UI controller in a moment, or in the widget blueprint that we'll go through now, actually. So that's how we bring the menu up and how we can make it visible and invisible. And once that's done, the blueprint widget itself will actually handle the button presses and the whole navigation, like which button needs to be in focus. So in our case, just to remind ourselves, this was the green highlight that I'm talking about. Whoops, that was not exactly what I meant. Well, we'll leave it in this view here. So as soon as the thing comes up, there's this is the button focus. The fact that the button is now green means there's keyboard focus on it. On the other buttons, you can just about see that they get kind of a little bit lighter than everything else. I can scroll with a mouse, or when I take my gamepad, the navigation is going to be different, because look, the moment my gamepad is active, the green thing actually moves. The green thing, and it should also kind of scroll off the screen. I guess it's kind of getting confused here because I've summoned the menu with my keyboard rather than with my gamepad. So if I do that, now it will work with the gamepad. And it will no longer work with the mouse. So this is kind of the issue that I was having there. If I bring it up from the keyboard, I'm assuming the user has mouse control, and then I can scroll this green thing off the screen, whereas when I have a gamepad, then I can really only scroll this thing when the green thing is in vision. So the green thing is when when keyboard focuses on a button. And that is what we're going through now in my blueprint widget. So under graph, this is kind of a little bit scary, but yeah, this is what happens really. This is a blueprint widget doesn't have a tick event. Oh no, actually it has a tick event, it just doesn't have an event begin play event. So the kind of equivalent is the event pre-construct that I'm using here. And I could hook this up to a tick event as well, but this way is a bit cheaper, the set timer by event. And it's cheaper because it doesn't happen 60 times a second or 240 times a second, depending on what the game is set to. This is a little bit cheaper. This only happens every 0.1 seconds or however long you want to set it. It's a looped event set by timer. It grabs a reference to our player controller, or in my case the tutorial player controller, and it sets it as a local variable just so that I have easier access to it. We're going to need that in a moment because we're going to grab are we using a gamepad type reference there, but the real meat of the thing happens here, the custom event that fires every 0.1 seconds. It is a little bit crazy, but it's, you know, we're getting there. It is essentially a for each loop that is asking an array of buttons that I've put in here, which are all the buttons that are in fact in my scroll box. All of these are hooked up, so they need to be hooked up so that they can be queried, is there keyboard focus on it or not, so I can scroll through them. Only 3 of them do anything, but you know, I could react to more. They just need to all be in the array. So in that array, or in this for each loop, I'm asking each button, do you have keyboard focus? Like here, does this thing have keyboard focus? And if that is the case, then we're setting the background to green. If it's not the case, we're setting it to just a light gray, so they're not highlit. That's what this does. For every button, I'm asking this. If we are indeed using a gamepad, then we just scroll this focused button into view. If we're not doing that, we don't have to do that. And in fact, like you've seen in my demonstration, if we're scrolling this into view, and I'm trying to scroll away from it with my mouse wheel, this isn't going to work. But with my gamepad, it needs to happen. In fact, if I don't do this, I can only select the 9 buttons that are currently in vision. So that's what happens here. We're having a focus event every 0.1 seconds, and in it, it'll take an array of all the buttons in my viewport. For every button, we're asking, are we currently in focus? And if so, give us a green highlight. If we're not in focus, don't do that. If we are also using a gamepad, then go ahead and scroll us into position so that the menu can scroll. That's what this thing does. It also does something else. It reacts to the actual button presses. On-clicked potato button, tomato button, pepper button. And all I'm doing here is I'm setting a local variable that is not actually a local variable, sorry. It is a variable that is on the player controller, and I'm setting that, it's a string variable, and I'm setting that to the value. I didn't really know how else to do this, but it's just it's a string that holds either potato, tomato, or pepper, and I'm setting that depending on what button I'm pressing in my widget. I'm doing that so that the thing doesn't get planted immediately. I'm making basically a selection, and then I can dismiss the menu, and then I can go and plant my thing. And that magic is now happening in the player controller again. There's quite a lot happening in the player controller, isn't there? So this is the summoning menu, and this is, where was that again? Plant flower after selecting it with the menu. This is actually fairly straightforward. This is a custom input action that's hooked up either to the P button on the keyboard or to my B button on the gamepad. And when it's pressed, we're taking that string value that I've just set with the button press, and I'm basically asking here, does this string say potato? In which case, go ahead, create a plant of class potato. If it says tomato, then create this. If it says pepper, then create this with the pepper. There's also default case. That's what a switch statement looks like. It always has to, it can switch on either an integer or a string or I suppose, on an enum. And at that point, it just makes that decision. If neither of these cases is true, if my string were not existent, or if it says, I don't know, carrot or something, then neither of these cases would be true. In that case, the default case will happen, in which case it'll plant a pepper. That's how I do that. The switch on string, that was a little bit difficult for me to understand. It's just the way Unreal Engine does it. In code, you would just write that out, but because these things are kind of blueprint bound, let me go and drag off and show you what I mean there. So if I type in switch, I can usually switch string, I think. Is that what yeah, there we go. Switch on string, that does this, and I can go and add pins with that. So there's case 1, case 2, and case 3. I put some kind of a selection in here, or I'm going to ask what this is manually, and then I can go and do whatever depending on what each case turns out to be. But what wasn't quite clear to me was, well, how am I gonna tell the switch node what string I'm referring, what string case needs to be true? How do I do that? Well, it appears that if I select this up here, it lets me do that. Some nodes, they need you to compile this thing first before this selection becomes visible. But this is where I'm now saying, well, I'm basically specifying the string I'd like to be queried. So does this say potato, for example, or does it say whatever, carrot? And that is then reflected in that node once I've specified it here. That's how that works. Let me go and undo this, because it's kind of working really well. So there's still a few things to be ironed out, like what happens if I start my selection with a gamepad and then I go over to my mouse. That kind of doesn't work, but in principle, it's working. I'm very pleased with it. Let me show you this in full screen again. I'm very pleased with it. I can bring up a menu, I can make a selection. It also then says something in the top here. I'm also, oh, by the way, actually, while I'm making a selection, my mouse cursor is visible, which is great, actually. That is nice. I'm going to say pepper, close the menu, and then my mouse cursor goes away again. That is very cool as well. So that is something else that I had to make happen. Oh, why doesn't it happen? Why doesn't it work, man? Come on, and plant stuff. Hey. Nothing gets planted anymore. Have I disconnected something? At least you've seen it working in the beginning. I'm concerned. Potatoes can no longer be planted. Oh, I'll have a look at that in a moment. Anyway, that is that update from Jay's Farm. I hope you liked it. I hope you understood what I was trying to tell you. Menus were a little bit crazy. I might tell you more about that radio menu next time. That's actually a product from the Unreal Marketplace called Generic Radio Menus. That is something that I've picked up when it was free. It's usually $14.99 on the Unreal Marketplace, and it has lots and lots of options. There's an article on my website in which I'm explaining how to build such a radio menu and how to react to its things. I hope you enjoyed it. Next thing on my list of things to do is, in fact, get comfortable with the ray casting or line tracing like Katie is explaining it. That's very exciting. I've tried my hand at it, hence the cubes here that are in my game world, these green cubes here. This is exactly what Katie does, but I have really, I'm not that comfortable with that topic yet, but that is what's on my list of things to do. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, then please let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for your support, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.